I was so frustrated when I was trying to learn how to play chords. It felt like every song used different chords, and sure there were some common ones, but I wanted to learn how to play all the chords so I could become a complete musician and play any song I wanted. It wasn't until I understood that there's only 5 different kinds of chords that my playing really changed. In this video, we're going to cover these 5 categories in order of difficulty so you can not only build a complete chord vocabulary, but also so you have a defined learning progression that you can follow to improve your chord playing. Let's start at level 1. Level 1 is all about open chords. When you're first starting, there are 7 essential open chords you've got to master. We're going to walk through them really quickly, but if you want a more in-depth tutorial for how to play anything in this video, check out the links in the description. I want this video to mostly stay focused on giving you the order to learn stuff and explaining that order. Your first starter pack of chords on guitar should include E major, E minor, A major, A minor, G major, C major, and D major. So that's how you play them. And I know it probably feels like I just threw 7 random chords at you, but there are 2 good reasons we learn these 7 chords first out of anything. The first reason is the surface level reason, and that's that you learn 7 chords that you didn't know before. So if a song calls for a C major, for example, you can now play a C major chord. The second and more important reason we learn these 7 first is because of the shapes you put your hand in to play these chords. The more you understand guitar, the more you're going to realize that all other chord shapes are based on these 7 shapes. And because literally every other chord is just a modification of these 7 chords, you've got to master these before you move on to level 2, bar chords. Let's open level 2 by explaining how bar chords and open chords from level 1 are different. Open chords are called that because they involve open strings. So for any open chord, there's going to be some unfretted open strings ringing out. Bar chords are not like that. With bar chords, every single note is fretted. The way we accomplish that is by taking our first finger and making a bar at a certain fret. Like for example, I'm on the 5th fret here, I'll make a bar. Then I can add a chord shape on top of that to create a bar chord. Just like before, we're going to fly through the chord shapes. If you want a super granular tutorial, that video will be linked, and then we're going to explain how you can use these chords to expand your overall vocabulary. So the first step to playing any bar chord is making a bar. Basically, you take your first finger and press down really hard on every string at one fret. If I were to bar on the 5th fret right here, it'd sound like this. Then you're going to add a chord shape on top. We're going to start with the E string root major shape. This is clearly a major chord and the root is on the E string. Now you have the E string root minor shape. Same thing, it's just a minor chord. Then we can move to the A string root minor shape, which is still a minor chord, but now the root's on the A string. And then there's the A string root major shape. Major chord, root on the A string. So that's how you play them, but how do you use bar chords to actually move yourself closer to being able to play all chords? To answer that, I have to explain why I've been referring to these as bar chord shapes instead of just bar chords. The reason is because bar chord shapes, unlike open chords, are actually movable. So if we take our E string root major shape, for example, like I just showed you, this is an A major chord because the root here is an A. But unlike open chords, there's no open strings tying this shape to this position. So we can move this around, we can move this up. In this case, this would be a B major chord because now the lowest note, the root, is B. We can move it all the way down here. Now the lowest note is F, be an F major chord. The fact that all 4 of the bar chord shapes are movable in this exact same way unlocks a ton of new chords for us that weren't available as open chords. G major was available as an open chord, but what about G sharp? There's no G sharp major open chord, but we can play that as a bar chord. If you really think about it and break it down, the 4 bar chord shapes that we learned unlock 48 unique chords that you can play now. There's 12 unique notes on each string. We can play a minor chord and a major chord for each one of those notes. You multiply that by 2 strings, and you have 48 new chords you can play. So at this point, you might be making the mistake of thinking that that's it. You can play major and minor chords that correspond to every single note, but there's still a little bit more to go. You still have to learn level 3. 7th chords. This is the level where chord names start to look more like industrial part numbers than music. 7th chords are a kind of bar chord. They're a little bit more complex, which is why they're next in the learning progression, and they only have one important difference from all the other chords that we've played up until this point. That difference is that 7th chords are made up of 4 notes, whereas everything we've been playing so far is only made up of 3 notes, which sounds confusing, but it's really not. Basically, to build any chord, all you do is take the 1st, 3rd, and 5th note of the corresponding scale, and you play them all back to back, and that makes a chord. All a 7th chord does is make that the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th note, and then you get a really pretty sounding chord. I know I sound like a broken record, but if you want a deep explanation, I got a video on it. We're going to go over the shapes really quickly. Alright, so just like bar chords, there's 4 essential shapes, and just like bar chords, all these shapes are movable. The E string root major 7th chord shape looks like this. The E string root minor 7th chord shape looks like this. The A string root major 7th shape looks like this. And the A string root minor 7th shape looks like this. Luckily, understanding how to use 7th chords is super simple. Anywhere you would have a regular chord, you can just substitute in a 7th chord and it sounds a little prettier. If I'm playing a song and it has a B major chord, I can sub in a B major 7th chord. It'll sound kind of nice, kind of jazzy. Same thing goes for minor chords. You're smart, you get it. Moving on. Level 4 is about partial chords. Now, this level is really guitar playing puberty. We're going to put some musical hair on your chin here. The good news is that there's no new chord shapes in this level. We're just going to change how you use them. When I say this level is guitar puberty, what I mean is that as you mature as a musician, you're going to realize that even though you can play a full chord, you shouldn't always do that. You should sometimes opt to play just a few notes out of a chord or a partial chord. The highest level of musicianship is not about you, it's about the song, it's about serving the song that you're playing. If you're playing in the context of a band or a recording where there's other harmonic information going on, then you probably just don't need to play a lot of the chord that you can. What you'll find is a lot of times these chords that contain less information actually sound better. This can even hold true when you're not in the context of a band. To demonstrate this, I'll play a simple funk groove in B. The first time around I'll play it with full chords. Listen. Now, this time, to really exaggerate it, I'm just going to play the top 2 strings and nothing else. Probably sounds a lot more funky, probably does a better job of communicating the musical idea I'm trying to communicate. Now, knowing which notes to leave out and which to include is a creative decision that's up to you, but this creative decision can be informed by experience, practice, and understanding the parts of a chord so you know which notes are maybe more important in a certain context. As a quick footnote to this level, I just want to mention that learning the cage system can be a really useful tool when it comes to understanding which notes are important. But with that said, let's finish off this list with level 5. In this level, we're going to learn the secret chord that David played to please the Lord. That was a good one. It's 11:22 p.m. on a Saturday night. What am I doing? Level 5 is all about chord extensions and chord inversions, but before we talk about that, I want to refocus on our original goal, which was to learn all the chords. So far we've talked about open chords, bar chords, 7th chords, and partial chords. And if you focus on just this stuff, you're going to build a really complete, really usable chord vocabulary. To spoil the ending here, there's a theoretically infinite number of chord inversions and extensions that you could do. So there's a theoretically infinite number of chords you could possibly play. But practically speaking, again, if you practice the stuff we've talked about, you'll be a really complete musician. But in the interest of not being totally lost, if you ever run across inversions or extensions, let's talk about them really quick. Inversions are really simple. All it is taking the notes of a chord. We were talking about how it's the 1st, 3rd, and 5th note of the corresponding scale, and just playing them in a different order. So instead of 1, 3, 5, you could play like 3, 1, 5, for example. I'm not going to fully explain the cage system in this video, but it's a really good place to start when it comes to chord inversions. To give a really quick example of chord inversions, I could play D major like this. I can invert it and play it like this, like this. There's a lot of different chord inversions. Chord extensions are just adding more notes to chords. So if you think back to 7th chords, adding the 7ths to our regular triads, or what they're called, that was actually a chord extension. I'm not going to give you any chord shapes here because there's so many of them and there's so many different ways to do the same thing. I don't want to confuse you. Just understand that the most common chord extensions you're going to see are the 9th, 11th, and 13th. And these are just the 2nd, 4th, and 6th scale degrees, respectively, played an octave up and thrown into the chord. If you're interested in extensions, you should study jazz. So that brings us to the end of all the chords you should learn on guitar in order. We talked about open chords, bar chords, 7th chords, partial chords, and we talked about how those are the chords that you should work on if you're trying to build a complete vocabulary. And then you should understand chord inversions and chord extensions because you can never know all of those, but it is important to understand them. I hope this helps you learning chords, and thank you for watching.